Welcome to the Haynes Report. I'm Carole Haynes. When a country wants to conquer another country, it's easier if they first destroy the targeted country's culture and values. The first step in that destruction is to sabotage the schools where civilization instills its knowledge, its values, its culture, and its language into its people. In this episode, I'm discussing how the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP, is actually coming onto American soil with our permission to propagandize our youth. How are they doing it, and what can we do to stop it? Over the past 2 decades, the CCP has focused on building up the Chinese military and developing soft power globally. This is a term that was coined back in 1990 by Harvard University scholar Joseph Nye to describe how a country manipulates what it wants other countries to think to help shape international politics. The CCP has been able to spread its global propaganda because of the academic freedom in educational institutions, especially within the United States. Chinese teachers are carefully trained, they're carefully chosen, and then they're trained to present only a favorable impression of China, and they're supposed to suppress anything that's negative about Chinese Communist Party and anything negative about China. One of the CCP's best-known propaganda machines are the Confucius Institutes that are actually disguised as education centers. The Chinese government controls and fully funds and supplies these Confucius Institutes that are designed for the university, and also their offshoot Confucius classes that are for K through 12. They bring in these, again, carefully selected teachers and instructional materials. The Confucius Institutes, or the CI, sponsor international conferences and also research papers on Chinese topics. China's current dictator has increased funding for the CIs. He calls them a very important part of China's overseas propaganda setup. So that tells you a lot about that this is very intentional, what they're doing. We need to be aware that it's very intentional that they are indoctrinating our people, and it is for their own purpose. China spends at least $10 billion a year on its soft power public relations. While the United States is not really an official part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese state media has touted the work done by Confucius Institutes and Confucius classrooms to further the Chinese Communist Party's global influence. These Confucius Institutes, CIs, were established in 2004, and by 2020, there were 500 worldwide, with more than 100 sitting right here on American college campuses. In fact, the U.S. had more Confucius Institutes than any other country. The Han Band spent $158 million on these between 2006 and 2019, just those in the United States alone. Now, since 2009, Chinese propaganda has infiltrated K through 12 through more than 1,000 of those schools worldwide. Those are the Confucius classes. National focus in the United States has been on the university Confucius Institutes, just on the college level. And the public has really paid next to no attention to the Confucius classes that are actually go from kindergarten up through the 12th grade. That is changing. There's been a lot of talk about it, but there's been no proof because it's so widespread, and we have so many thousands of schools out there, and this goes under the radar. But there's been a recent report, an investigative report published by Parents Defending Education, and that's PDE. And here's the name of this report, and you might want to look that up. It's called Little Red Classrooms, China's Infiltration in American K-12 Schools. It reports that about 143 schools across 34 states and in D.C. have had some form of Confucius Institute-related programs. Remember that these are the offshoots of the Confucius Institutes at the university level, so they're like a sister organization. The PDE report shows that from 2009 to 2023, the CCP provided more than $17 million to these 143 Confucius Institute-related programs. That much has gone into our nation under the radar. We know that at least 7 contracts are still active in public and private schools in Texas, Kentucky, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Oregon, and Washington. However, there was a report done in 2019. It was a staff report by the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Permanent Subcommittees on Investigations. That report found that at that time in 2019 that the CCP had actually funded 518 Confucius classrooms in the United States alone, and they were operating in both public and private schools throughout our country. The staff report notes that the Chinese government controls every aspect of these Confucius institutes, and that, of course, includes these Confucius classrooms. The United States has allowed Communist China to steal our most critical information, and there are no repercussions. We just are handing them whatever they want. In 2019, here's what the FBI found, that any foreign state adversaries seek to illicitly or illegitimately acquire U.S. academic research and information to advance their scientific, economic, and military development goals. So our FBI already knew what they were doing. In a 2020 speech, FBI Director Chris Wray outlined the threat, saying that China pays scientists at U.S. universities to secretly bring our knowledge and innovation back to China, including valuable federally funded research. And there has been stuff in the news on that, and some of the Chinese people have been caught. But there's a lot more of it that goes on under the radar that's not coming out. The PDE report notes that the CCP has ties to school districts near, and this is critical to understand, that they have ties to school districts near 20 of our U.S. military bases. And here are the bases. There's one at the Annapolis Area Naval Complex in Maryland. You know, that includes the Naval Academy there. It's a whole complex around there. And then there's the Fort Bragg Army Base in North Carolina, the Fort Knox Army Base in Kentucky, Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, the Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, Puget Sound Naval in Washington State, and San Diego Naval in California. So the question is, why is the CCP so interested in being near our military bases? That's something that that has to be top priority. Why are they going there? What is it? How are they trying to get on base or to get the secrets or the information, the research or whatever? They're also connected to 3 of our top science and technology high schools. These high schools have ties to the government-affiliated programs, and here's one. This is one of the top ones in the United States, the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. It received more than $1 million for this program, and it's affiliated with one of China's top military schools. That should give you heart stop. This school, the Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, has ties to, and I'm not saying this right in Chinese, in Mandarin, but Tsinghua University High School, which is the high school affiliated with one of China's top military schools, Tsinghua University, and that university is the alma mater of today's Chinese dictator. There's another school. I told you there were 3. Here's the second one, Simpson County Public Schools in Kentucky. They entered into an agreement with North China Electric Power University, and that university works directly with the Chinese government's energy sector to push China's global energy initiatives as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. Now, think about with the school tied in there and what they're finding out from us and what they're training our young people to be, and maybe even to come over there eventually, but to control their thinking. They're thinking about the Communist or the Chinese Communist Party and about China. Here's the third school. The North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics received a Confucius Classroom of the Year award from Hanban in 2018. Hanban is a bureau of Beijing's Ministry of Education. Now it's known as the Center for Language Exchange and Cooperation. Of course, anything to make it sound a little bit more friendly. That is the Center for Language Exchange and Cooperation. Sometimes you just see the letters and acronym CLEC. So be watching for that. Well, we should be asking why the CCP is also interested in our top science and technology high schools. Obviously, they want to control what these brilliant young students learn and think about China and the CCP. We can bet that they're going to be targeting these young people later on to use them for China's technological and scientific needs, as well as for them to be like a goodwill ambassador for China to spread out positive messages about the CCP. Some school districts have partnered with Confucius Institutes on colleges nearby. Other districts, these are the ways that the K-12 gets involved. They will partner up with the Confucius Institute that's on a college campus nearby, but then other school districts get government funding through third-party nonprofit entities. Well, here in Texas, where I am and live now, Highland Park Independent School District, and that is right in the heart of Dallas, so you'll know where it is, that has received funding. And by the way, it's a very upscale, a very wealthy area, but they still went out for communist funding. They got this funding from the International Leadership of Texas Global, which is a nonprofit organization. Still, some of the other school districts work through two U.S. corporations, one, the College Board, that I'm sure you've heard of, and also the Asia Society. And these collaborated directly with Hanban about Chinese programs and funding for American schools. The PDE's report noted that Asia Society was a key participant in establishing Confucius Institutes and Confucius classrooms until its relationship with the programs ended in June 2021. There is something that's very important that we need to know here. There's a very troubling money trail, and it runs between the Asia Society and the American organizations tied to the New World Order. Now, here's what, so we have the Asian Society, and then we have these organizations. All of these are tied together and tied back in to this CPP. Okay, here's the Open Society. You recognize that it's George Soros' foundation. The Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. They're all tied together. There's a money trail that leads back to these Confucius Institutes, to the Confucius classrooms, and to the Chinese Communist Party. The PDE reports that while the United States is not officially part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, Chinese state media has touted the work done by Confucius Institutes and Confucius classrooms to further the Chinese Communist Party's global influence. That's important to know because they think it's very, very important. Parents Defending Education has given this report to state and federal lawmakers to spur immediate action. U.S. Congressman Jim Banks, who sits on the newly established House Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the U.S. and the Chinese Communist Party, wrote a letter to the U.S. Department Secretary Miguel Cardon demanding urgent action to terminate these disturbing partnerships. Those are in his words. Congressman Banks pointed out that under President Trump, the State Department designated Confucius Institutes a foreign mission, which helped to shut some of them down. And then under the 2021 National Defense Authorization, the NDAA, the Pentagon is actually prohibited from providing money to institutions of higher education that host a Confucius Institute after this fall, October 1st of 2023. Well, as a result, since the 2021 NDAA passage, over 100 of the U.S. universities have shut down their Confucius Institutes. However, this is what they say they have done. We know that they're lying to us. As of May of this year, the National Association of Scholars, the NAS, reports that 10 Confucius Institutes are still in operation, with 111 institutes that have either closed or in the process of closing. Of these 11 that are supposedly closed or in the process of closing, at least 28 have replaced their Confucius Institute with a similar program, and at least 58 have maintained close relationships with their former Confucius Institute partner. So nothing has really changed. They're just sort of going underground, going around and doing an end run around our laws. And Congressman Mike Walz from Florida is on to them, and he said this about the PDE report. He said it's alarming because we truly don't understand the full extent of Communist China's meddling in our education system. Imagine that our own U.S. government is actually clueless about how many of its thousands of elementary, middle, and high schools house Confucius classrooms. Congressman Mike Walz also said this, that the CCP is using Chinese shell companies to outright buy American private schools around the United States. So now, parents, you spend tens of thousands of dollars sending your children to a private school, and you wake up and you say, but my children are being indoctrinated by the CCP. We really have to check those schools very, very carefully and see what information they have, what kind of instructional materials they have, who are their teachers. And parents have to be very, very engaged. You have to go to the school and you have to be very engaged in your child's education. Walz is also sounding the alarm on Chinese-owned schools in the U.S. that have a military junior ROTC program. And Walz has asked the Pentagon to survey those schools because this is really a very critical national security threat to our country. Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas has introduced a bill recently to prohibit federal agencies from funding research in China or any entity owned by China. The 2019 staff report for the Senate Committee on Homeland Security listed these recommendations, and this is interesting because I'll go through them and talk about how realistic this is. This is what we should be doing, but let's see where we're going. Okay, here's the first recommendation, that Congress should require all U.S. schools to publish any contracts with foreign governments, including all Confucius Institute contracts, online for students and faculty review. It should be very transparent, as the left likes to tell us. Very transparent. These contracts should have clear and irrefutable provisions protecting academic freedom at the school, where the teachers are not told you can't talk about this or you can't talk about that. You have to shut down anything that is negative about China or the Chinese Communist Party. These contracts should avoid provisions that would apply the law of a foreign country onto a U.S. campus. In other words, we're having to toe the line to do what China wants us to do. They give us money, but only if we do it their way. So it's their way or the highway, or we don't get the money. Number 2 of this Senate staff recommendation, U.S. schools should ensure that Hanban does not exercise a line item veto authority when approving annual Confucius Institute budgets. U.S. schools must ensure that any foreign government funded activities or research do not hinder the academic or present one-sided selective positions to American students. Our American students are to be told the truth. Confucius Institute events and activities should also include disclaimers about the source of funding. Now, I don't know how realistic we think that's going to be, and this is what we should be doing. So let's leave that in there, but just know that these schools should be penalized if they don't follow this. If they go along to get along and to get that money, then they should be severely penalized because they're violating the laws of our nation. U.S. schools should ensure the Hanban's vetting, their screening, and their interview processes align with their own hiring procedures and protocols. The process of selecting directors and teachers should be very transparent to our American schools and to their administrative staff. Our U.S. schools should also attempt to recruit Chinese language instructors outside of the Communist Party purview. We should go around them, and there are plenty of people who know the Mandarin language out there who can come in, and they're not tied to the Chinese Communist Party. And the fourth recommendation, Congress and state and local education officials should study the need and demand for Chinese language education program in the United States and consider additional investments where necessary. They go on to say that U.S. schools and state and local boards of education should not outsource Chinese language teaching to the Hanban. And that's important because that ties us back in and into this into this tie with the Communist Party and Chinese Communist Party. Number 5, the Department of Justice should determine if Confucius Institutes engage in activity to influence the U.S. government or public on behalf of foreign principles. The Department of Justice should then assess whether any CI or its employee should register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, that's called FARA, for work on behalf of the Chinese government. Number 6, the State Department of the U.S. should review all active Confucius Institutes and Confucius classrooms for compliance with visa regulations, standards, and practices. The State Department should collect foreign visa information for J1 researchers and teachers associated with Confucius Institutes in the United States. And let me digress here for a minute. Back in 2018, the State Department was actually looking at these visas, and they didn't go through a lot of them, and yet I think it was just maybe 2. I'm not sure how many schools and all that went through, but they actually canceled 32 visas. There was that much corruption on it. The people who were holding the visas were lying, and they said that they were doing research when the truth is they were really teaching the students. The State Department should collect the researchers and the teachers associated with these institutes, get all the visa information. We should be keeping that on in our database at the U.S. State Department. Number 7, our U.S. schools should comply with the law and properly report foreign gifts to the Department of Education. They're not doing that now. And if U.S. schools that fail to properly report any foreign gifts should submit corrected and updated reporting as soon as practicable to the Department of Education. And there should be some kind of penalty if they don't do that. Number 8, the Department of Education should update its guidance requiring U.S. schools to report any funds provided by an institution owned or controlled by a foreign source, especially a foreign government. The department should also update and modernize its website so schools can easily upload the foreign gift information. The Department of Education and the Department of Justice should conduct oversight and pursue appropriate action against any U.S. school that doesn't do this. And we know that most are not doing this. You see, if you look at some of the figures and facts on it, there are all kinds of reasons why they complain that they haven't done it. Number 9, the State Department should demand reciprocal and fair treatment of its diplomats and employees in China. This should include routine access to all U.S. tax-funded sites, the projects, and events. The State Department should also complete its own internal review of the effectiveness of the American Cultural Center program. Number 10, the State Department should remain in close contact with all grantees in foreign countries and develop a formal system to collect information about interference, any harassment, or any questioning by foreign authorities. The State Department should use that information then to assess the safety of the grantees working in foreign countries and the effectiveness of their programs. And then number 11, U.S. schools should continue to partner with Chinese universities. Partnering with foreign universities offers students unique international learning experiences and enhance research opportunities. U.S. schools, however, should never under any circumstances compromise academic freedom. U.S. schools operating in China should inform students about China's internet censorship and other relevant constraints. Good luck on this. I'm not so sure. I mean, this sounds like a great idea. How practical it's ever going to be, I think we would need to come back and address that again and look at other ways to work through that, because I don't see China is, or some of these other countries who really want to do us in, as being very open and above board. They're not going to be very transparent at all. Number 12, the last one, U.S. schools should demand that Hanban be fully transparent about Confucius Institute's hiring practices and provide reciprocity, which they don't now, to U.S. school programs at Chinese schools. Given the concerns regarding academic freedom and broader U.S. interests related to China, U.S. schools should be fully aware of any drawbacks associated with hosting Confucius Institutes. Absent full transparency regarding how Confucius Institutes operate in full reciprocity for U.S. cultural outreach efforts on college campuses in China, Confucius Institutes should not continue in the United States. And probably we'll get to that point, because I don't see things as being at all transparent with the Hanban, with the CCP, China or otherwise. And in conclusion, let's look at what has really been going on here for a very long time. We have not been allowing, and did not allow, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, or Imperial China to gain a foothold in American educational system. So now why are we permitting the Chinese Communist Party to gain such influence? In K-12 Confucius classrooms, China's propaganda of colorful, positive messages has played a key role in China's soft power campaign. Allowing the CCP in our schools has ongoing national security implications. I cannot emphasize that enough. So here's some questions for us as Americans to consider. Why are we allowing China to buy our farmland? I know you've seen all kinds of things in the news about that, buying up tens of thousands of acres. Why are we allowing the Chinese Communist Party to set up their police stations on American soil? How crazy is that? Why are we allowing China to steal our intellectual property? Why are we allowing China to spy on our military bases? Over here in Texas, a Chinese billionaire with ties to the Chinese Communist Party bought up 140,000 acres. Some of these acreage sit up high, and they actually overlook Laughlin Air Force Base, where military pilots are trained. So why are we allowing China to buy their way into our K-12 schools? And that's what they're doing. They're buying their way in, and we're taking their money. Those who defend Confucius classrooms at K-12, here's what they always argue, that these programs are really harmless. They're harmless language and cultural lessons. What could be the problem with that? Plenty. Number one, China does not allow reciprocity, as I indicated earlier. No other countries, especially no free countries, no free democracies, and we're not a democracy here, but we are a free country, are allowed to establish the equivalent of Confucius classrooms in China to promote our culture and our language. They are not going to allow us to promote our culture and our language. If we did, they would have to sanitize everything and put their own spin on it. The CCP wants to control what their children are taught and think, but they also want to control what our children are taught and think. Number two, the Confucius Classroom program is designed to create normal, positive feelings about China and then associate China and the Communist Chinese and the Chinese Communist Party. Well, this is what they wanted to do, and this is where it's been going. And students are not supposed to see any separation between the party and the country. And they have the dictator today is working on a modern day education program to try to bring together so that people don't see any difference in party, meaning the Chinese Communist Party, and the country. Right now, I mean, it's two. You've got the party, you've got the country. Like you have the United States, you've got the Republican Party or the Democrat Party. They want it to look as though it's one and the same there. And then a third thing that's a problem with these Confucius Institutes is that they're intended to silence, or at least to distract from the critics of China and the Communist Party. Teachers are selected very carefully, and they're trained, and they're sternly warned to steer clear of any classroom discussions from an ever-expanding list of issues such as Taiwan, Tibet, Tiananmen Square, Hong Kong, Inner Mongolia, the South China Sea, and then more. So the problem isn't what's being said in Confucius classrooms and in Confucius lessons. It's what is not being said, especially over here in our American schools. Beijing's most effective critics are those Chinese dissidents, many who have fled and they've settled in other countries to get away from the CCP. When the party plants its flag in U.S. schools, most Americans, though, likely see it as an exotic international artifact, but to a Chinese dissident, it's a message, do not criticize the party, because that flag means that you cannot criticize the party. Recent protests at Tufts University, which to its credit closed its Confucius Institute recently, express exactly this concern. Well, we should be asking whether Americans need to know about Chinese culture or the Mandarin language. The answer is yes. We absolutely do need to know. We need a global perspective, cultural awareness, and multilingual skills. These are vital. Studying Chinese language, the Mandarin language, the culture, and the history can be accomplished, though. We don't need to have the Chinese communist teachers in our classrooms. There's plenty of information that we can find with the truth there that can be taught to these students. Mandarin proficiency is very important for many reasons, including trade and national security among them. And as a business entrepreneur myself, in addition to an educational policy analyst and advisor, I will tell you this, I have been abroad, and I remember sitting in Mexico in meetings, and while they know English, they will be conducting their meeting, especially when we were at banks, they would be conducting their meetings in Spanish. So if you don't know the language, you don't know what they're saying. And when we have businessmen who are sitting in Chinese meetings, they don't really know what's being said if they don't know the language. And so really, for our own security and for business purposes, we absolutely, if we're going to be in the business world, need to be proficient in this, because China is so important in the world in terms of the business. In fact, here in Texas, Chinese or Mandarin is the most frequently spoken language outside of English in our entire state. That tells you how many Chinese that we really have here in this state. If we want to develop an independent Chinese language program that are not related to the Chinese Communist Party, then it's easy enough to do. We can simply work with Taiwan if we want an international exchange program aspect to Mandarin programs. Our schools can work with Taiwan, and Taiwan is a thriving democracy with a culture of free speech. In late 2020, the United States government signed a memorandum of understanding with Taiwanese authorities to support more education with language and cultural exchange opportunities for our people here. American communities can also recruit teachers from Taiwan. American schools with Chinese language and culture programs, and especially our 327 Mandarin immersion schools, and that's what we call them here in the United States, is immersion schools, should be commended. But these programs should be entirely independent of the Chinese Communist Party. Most importantly, we should not allow the Chinese Communist Party to fund any of our programs, zero, because they're actually paying us to allow them to brainwash our young people. How crazy is that? Well, that's it for this episode, folks. There's much more in upcoming episodes about the Communist Party and American schools, so I hope you'll join me again for those. Thank you for listening to the Haynes Report, and do check out my website, www.drcarolehaynes.com, www.drcarolehaynes.com. Also, please subscribe to my other podcasts, and you can find those at Google, Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, YouTube, and Rumble. Till next time.